is an investment that is going to pay back in either the growth of your people, the growth of your community, or the growth of the province as a whole.
Live from the municipalities of Saskatchewan office, this is MuniCast, the municipal podcast that's tackling the topics you want to know about. I'm your host, Sean Wiscar. This podcast is brought to you by SaskTel's Innovation and Collaboration Team. SaskTel can help you sort through the noise to create solutions that add value quickly. Whether it's reducing your environmental footprint, driving investment, community development, or just saving money, contact your SaskTel account manager to find out more. On today's episode, I sit down with the Saskatchewan Parks and Recreation Association CEO, Todd Shafer. Todd has worked in the recreation sector for nearly 3 decades and is passionate about the benefits it has for communities. Our conversation today is centered on how your community can make the most of its opportunities and make meaningful investments in recreation. There's lots to discuss, so let's jump into it. Thank you for taking the time to join us and talk a little bit about recreation and mental health. And I think a good opportunity to start this off is just to talk about who you are. How did you get to this point in your life, and what spurred your passion for recreation?
That's a great question, Sean, and certainly my pleasure to be here today. What spurred my passion? Probably a connection that started when I was a kid, involved in sports of any kind. Continued to get more interested and involved in the recreation side, so the more broad perspective of what recreation is and what it can encompass once I was at university. And then had an opportunity then to work in municipalities in Saskatchewan and the Northwest Territories, worked with a few nonprofits as well doing this kind of work, and actually spent a little bit of time doing some consulting work outside of that as well related to policy development. So understanding that this work related to recreation is often visible at that program level and those services that are provided, but that there's so much more behind it, and both the places and spaces that are set up for this recreation and parks work, as well as then the policies that have to drive that at a higher level.
I think you talking about your background brings up some really interesting points, and one of the first questions I had for you is, how do we define recreation? What is it? And, we talked a lot in our webinar that we did in April about how recreation is more than just physical activity. There's a lot more activities and options and a variety out there available to people. So what does it encompass, and what benefits are there for communities to expand into kind of the non-physical aspects of recreation?
I'll give you first the official definition within the framework for recreation in Canada, which is called Pathways to Wellbeing. And this was designed in 2015, and it was a national initiative that's basically set the foundation for recreation services and plans across the country when it was created. And within there, they define recreation as the experience that results from freely chosen participation in physical, social, intellectual, creative, and spiritual pursuits that enhance individual and community well-being. In a nutshell, for me, that can encompass so many things when it comes to recreation, but it really drives home on that individual and community well-being perspective, right? So all of those things that people are spending their leisure time on enhancing their own or contributing to what the well-being is within a community.
Absolutely.
And I do think, as we talked about a little bit in that webinar in April, the concept of that direct reflection of physical activities or fitness or sport or even art as being kind of the primary drivers or the primary connections to recreation. And I do think it's far beyond that. When you think about what those benefits are to a community that decides that they want to invest more in recreation, it's really about improving quality of life for their residents. It's about stimulating some economic growth. It's about attracting and retaining people and families and businesses in their communities. It's about, that whole concept of health. We talked in April about mental health, and the traditional fallback is physical health when it comes to that association with recreation. I'm curious for you, now that we've gone through that podcast or that webinar back in April, what do you see, or what kind of stood out for you related to what maybe you thought recreation was and what you maybe see recreation as right now?
It's definitely an interesting question. For me, recreation has always been, it's that shiny playground that a community opens, and it's a good opportunity for kids to get out and do something outside. Our parents would always say, go spend some time outside. You don't need to be spending your whole day inside, but I really liked the concept of using recreation as kind of more of a community building aspect, bringing people into libraries and offering them programming, bringing people into the art community, or even something as simple as opening up your community hall and having a potluck dinner can be kind of a recreation activity for a community. So the broad scope of recreation and the options available out there for a community to invest in, it's really fantastic to see, and I like how it kind of encompasses more than, like I said, just the shiny playground for the kids to go play on.
For sure. And I think you hit it bang on, right? Like the idea is really about belonging and creating that sense of community or that sense of pride within communities, which can happen in a variety of ways. But I think that truly when recreation is seen as a foundational element for those things, those opportunities grow, and people, and we found it's in some of the research that's come out recently, especially when it comes to new people into communities, like when you have folks either from other parts of the country or even from outside of the country that are moving into communities. Although there's integration and opportunities for integration with school or with work, but really where those folks that are new to a community really start to feel like they're part of that community and that they belong is when they're engaged in some of those recreation type events or opportunities, right? Whether it's the local community hall or a larger rec center or the community rink or the curling rink, or even some of the park spaces and the trails that more and more municipalities are investing in.
Well, there's huge value in events such as that. I think of, here in Regina, we have things like a big outdoor, festival for kind of people to go hang out in the parks and engage in different kind of community events. And we see that right across the province. You have sidewalk days in Moose Jaw, you have smaller events in areas like Maple Creek, Swift Current, Yorkton, all over the province. People kind of are encouraging people to get out and invest in their community and see what it has to offer. And like I said, I think you mentioned that those are great opportunities to get out, become kind of one with the community, bring yourself in and have that feeling of being really connected to the people you live around.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the concept of recreation as a foundation for community development is absolutely front and center in all of those. Like when you talk about the professionals that work inside of this recreation industry, they're event planners, they're community developers, they're people that can interact and make people feel safe and secure and welcome inside of those opportunities, both for the folks that live in the community as well as those maybe drawing from outside of the community.
So I think this leads into a really good question that came out of our webinar that we did. Mayor Nick Dio had mentioned how there's no investment too small into recreation. And what does this mean in a practical sense for our municipalities?
Well, to start with, I think before getting into that practical sense part, the fact that Nick identified that as a mayor for a municipality just speaks volumes to the importance that community has placed on recreation, for sure. And of course, having worked in this industry for a long time, it's exciting when municipal decision makers are speaking with that kind of passion and that kind of language around that importance of investment in recreation and investment in community. And I think I would say, as far as what does it mean from a practical sense? Like, I think the realities of investing in what's important for your community, like that's certainly come out from Nick's dialogue, is he clearly knows what his community members need. and is making some decisions along with his council to address those needs. And certainly looking at it, when he talked about, the small things, even like reaching out and making sure for those that can't be at the potluck to take them plates to make sure that they feel like they're part of the community and feel like they belong is really important. The idea of balancing that, which I think came up further on in that webinar as well, related to, there's only so much money to go around, and trying to balance what this means. How do you invest in those recreation opportunities? And I think it's a shift for the fact that Nick used the term investment versus subsidy, I think is an important distinction. Recreation for a number of years has been seen as something that's subsidized by municipalities. And I think that the shift right now is that this is an investment that is going to pay back in either the growth of your people, the growth of your community, or the growth of the province as a whole, when you start to look at it from an investment perspective.
There's no investment too small. A lot of these facilities and opportunities exist in municipality already. You don't necessarily need to go out and build a new hockey arena to get good recreation opportunities out of your community. Chances are there's people in the community that are willing to put in the work to do what they can with what you have. No one's asking a small community of Weimark to build the next Connexus Arts Center. It's just not realistic. But what is realistic is providing a space for the community to gather and work with what they have. It's as simple as laying down some wood and freezing some water if that's all it can be. But yet that's still an opportunity that's there for the community.
Absolutely. Bringing up Weimark is an interesting one. It's a place close to my heart because I lived for a few years in Swift Current and coached a number of kids in volleyball from that community while I was down there. But it's certainly, you're right, that connection, especially in those small communities that still have a school. What's inside of that school? What's the opportunities? And Nick mentioned this, as did Tristan in his webinar as well, was the idea of who's out there for you to partner with, who also has some similar goals and similar objectives that you maybe haven't really thought about talking about this to. And I think that getting creative when it comes to those things is an important step. And who knows, maybe it starts, like you say, with just flooding a space within the community for kids to skate. And who knows where that evolves after that, and what that little spark may have both in those kids and the community members' lives, and possibly for that community as a whole, because maybe the desire is that they someday want to have a big arena, but it's got to start somewhere. Right? And there's got to be a desire to want to see what is it that's going to help our community survive and thrive.
Todd, I know you're not a mental health expert by any means. Your focus is obviously on recreation, but it was very clearly laid out in that webinar that there are huge mental health benefits from even simple recreation activities. So I'm just curious, how do you see kind of these opportunities emerging in Saskatchewan municipalities, and how can they take advantage of the conversation around mental health when it comes to recreation?
I'm not a mental health professional in any way, shape, or form. All I know is my own lived experience related to what recreation, getting out and connecting with nature, being able to be active and move and engage with people in my community and people around me. All of those things, I think, at the core of recreation, which has a contribution and can alleviate mental health stressors in communities and within individuals. And I think like you say, there's been so many, hesitations to talk about mental health, which is those barriers are starting to break down over the past number of years. And along with those barriers being broken down, I think it helps to stimulate and highlight, as Phyllis had identified in that webinar, that any opportunity that you have to engage with your community, to get out, to go for that walk in the trails or around the community is going to help contribute to just some of the changes that happen physiologically within your body to allow you to cope and be more resilient as individuals. And then the more of those resilient individuals that you have in your community, the more resilient that community becomes, because you start to see solutions instead of problems.
Yeah, absolutely. A thought comes to mind when you talk about getting out in the trails in the community. Trails don't necessarily need to be paved walkways that are kind of going around something like Wascana Lake. That's great, and it offers additional accessibility to people that may not necessarily be able to actually walk around a lake. But some of the most beautiful places in Saskatchewan are some of the most rural and remote. And it's just having those areas open for nature for people to go explore and reconnect with their wild side, as some might say, that I think really offers some great recreation opportunities across this province. Going up to somewhere like Tobin Lake comes to mind is just, one of absolutely the most beautiful places that we have in this province.
The opportunities are there for us, right? And for those of us that grew up in Saskatchewan, that have been in the prairies for a long time, know what that beauty is and what exists out there. And sometimes I think we forget what opportunities we do have, right? And compare ourselves to other areas where maybe there's mountains or there's different types of landscape that exists. But I do think you're right that anyone who's watched any of the Saskatchewanderer things with Tourism Saskatchewan over the past number of years sees what are those hidden gems that exist from a recreation opportunities perspective across the province. And I think that when municipalities start to see those tourism opportunities as they connect to some of their recreation activities, that also then possibly changes the mindset around what that could mean for their community from a growth and economic perspective as well.
Yeah, and I think some of our municipalities have done a great job taking up kind of this call for tourism and really kind of getting out and exploring. One that comes to mind is, I believe it's Carrot River has Saskatchewan's Outback, and they're trying to kind of make you think of the Australian Outback and that wilderness. It's a really effective marketing campaign. It made me want to go out there and kind of do some hiking and go explore to see what our province has to offer. Another big thing that I wanted to touch on, and we've kind of talked a little bit about it, but not explicitly, communities have to balance a variety of concerns for their residents, when it comes to planning investments, budgeting for their community. And often one that comes to the mind of many municipalities is public safety. Both Nick and Tristan DeRocher have discussed the power of opening up your recreation facilities, be it that potluck dinner, that rink. Do you think it's an effective strategy for a municipality? Are there any strong examples that come to mind of communities that have really done this to a powerful extent and been successful, this type of model?
There's no better example than what Nick provided in that webinar in April, because I think the concept of inclusiveness and belonging and recreation as a community developer was front and center in everything that he described, right? And so I think the idea of public safety, and I think we often look at recreation as that kind of the solution to keeping kids out of trouble, or for kind of looking at it from an almost like a negative perspective. But I do think it's about that sense of belonging and connecting people to what's going on. And what those opportunities are. When I think of, and this is some of my own past experience when I was involved with the city of Yorkton, and how there were some challenges with safety and around vandalism a little bit within the community, and it tended to be tied to some of the skateboarding community at that time. And as a recreation department at that time, we just took the initiative to reach out to those youth and to those kids that were skateboarding, to talk about what they were needing, what they were wanting, what some opportunities were. And that started to spur some dialogue and some growth. And of course, we've got some great municipal councillors in the city of Yorkton now. And we're at that time, one of the ones that comes to mind is Randy Golden was a councillor when I was in the city of Yorkton at that time as well. Huge supporter of recreation, and saw that opportunity to support any growth and investment in what they could do for that skateboard community at that time, which was growing and continues to grow. So development of a small skateboard park, working with the youth on making sure that skateboard park was theirs and wasn't just something that the adults built for them, but that they were invested in its creation, invested in the development and the felt like it was their own. They felt like they owned it. And so they also took care of it at that same time.
I think you raise a good point too. You can almost pivot this conversation to be a public safety and say these youth are out committing crimes, and so we need to focus on it that way. But recreation facilities don't need to be for just the youth that are at risk or in trouble or out there doing things that aren't necessarily correct. And that's not at all what it should be, because, I think back to my own childhood in the city of Swift Current. They had a great recreation facility they opened called the Center. And that facility wasn't for just the worst of the worst. It was for all youth. It kept people in that community from going down that path. So they weren't even necessarily at risk, but it didn't allow for opportunities for them to even become an at-risk youth. And I think that's the beauty of recreation, is it's a great equalizer. It's for everyone. If you can strap a pair of skates to your feet, you can go on a skating rink. If you're interested in reading, the library is for you and it's there and it's available. If you like to eat, and most people do, there's a community potluck that's likely happy and willing to feed you. There's all these opportunities out there, and you don't need to be on a bad path in life to utilize them. More so, this can kind of bring you in and, like we said, foster that sense of belonging, which I think is a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, no question. And the things that you just highlighted in there, right? The events and the, market type scenarios where people are it's a little tough in COVID right now, but in this pandemic environment, but certainly on the other side of this, being prepared for the demand that is going to come out from people wanting to interact with each other, wanting to be seen and to see others, wanting to engage in their community and be part of something bigger than just themselves. That's the opportunity that recreation can provide in those communities as they go forward. And certainly when it comes to that balancing of investment, right, that you mentioned earlier, that the idea that, there's only so much money to go around, and so you have to make some of those tough choices on what and where do you put your dollars, but also have a look at what does that contribution mean for us down the road, for our people, for the well-being of the community, for the well-being of the individuals that are going to be living there both now and for generations into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, we're running out of time here, Todd. So I just want to give you kind of an opportunity to express some final thoughts and wrap up this conversation a little bit. Something you said that was really interesting is we are in the COVID times. That's our reality. Maybe by the time that this podcast comes out, things will be a little bit more open and people will be able to be out camping and spend time with more than just their immediate household. But at the same time, we're not going to be fully back to where we are. So how do you think recreation is going to change over, the next 6 months to a year? And what recommendations do you have for municipalities to be ready for that?
That's a great question, and probably more, if that's a bigger question than the time we have at the end of this one. It's hard to crystal ball what that's going to look like, but I do think that there is going to be increased demand for recreation services, for those places and spaces where people can feel like they're part of a community and feel like they belong. And I think that all of that is going to contribute to mental health and well-being inside of their communities. So I guess I'll offer up at this point that if there's any questions from any municipality out there watching this or listening to this, and they want to talk more about what the opportunities are for their community or how we can help, certainly don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our website is www.spra.sk.ca, and we are available to answer any questions that you may have and help you no matter where you are on your path related to an investment in recreation going forward. So you can reach out to me directly or to any of the staff that we have at SPRA. They're more than willing to help.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Todd. I think this was an excellent conversation, and we got to hit on some of those things that I really wanted to talk on during that April webinar. So I'm really excited for our members to be able to listen to this, and I look forward to more conversations in the future with you folks. Well, this brings us to the end of our conversation with Todd Shafer of SPRA. Join me for my next podcast, July 14th, with former Humboldt